Hi, everybody. Welcome back to Civil War Monitors Behind the Lines. It's your host, David Thompson, again. Today, it's my privilege to be joined by Matt Dellinger, who is a writer, and most of you will recognize him from one of our most recent issues of the Civil War Monitor magazine. So, Matt, thanks so much for taking some time to join us today.
Thank you, and thank you for putting me on the cover. It really shocked and delighted a lot of people I knew to see me on
I'm
it.
sure it did. I'm sure it did. It's a really fascinating article, and by all means, I'll tell people at the end of the interview here what they can do if they want to actually pick up a back copy of this issue. But I wondered if you could just share with us a little bit, your story. It's about you being a reenactor, kind of how you got into being a reenactor. If you could just share a little bit of that with us.
Sure. Well, I have kind of, I think, a aptitude or potential interest in the Civil War. I kind of like big American topics. My first book was about interstates in America and one specific interstate project. And the Civil War has always interested me, but it was always this very daunting thing. That you can kind of read endlessly about it, as you and your readers know, and joyously so. But as a writer, it's hard to approach it. But I happened to, a friend of mine dragged me to this monument that was being rededicated in Brooklyn's Greenwood Cemetery one afternoon. And, I thought, okay, that's a fine way to spend a Saturday and kind of fun and local history, sure. And I went there, and there was a group of reenactors there that were reenacting the 14th Brooklyn. And I had the reaction that probably a lot of people have when they first encounter reenactors, which is kind of, an internal snickering perhaps, but also like more intrigue than snickering. And I thought, these people are here on a Saturday afternoon, they're giving of their time, they're obviously not being paid. So I went and I talked to a few of them, being the good reporter that I am. And they had this just enthusiasm that was contagious, and they talked to me about the Brooklyn 14th, and these guys, everyone adopts a certain soldier to kind of study and learn about when they joined the 14th, and they were telling me about the soldiers that they had adopted, and it was just a great story. I mean, here was this regiment from Brooklyn that had started out as a local militia and had gone on to kind of fame and renown. And it seemed like both a great local history topic within the broader giant Civil War topic, and it suddenly made the Civil War approachable. And I kind of had that was 10 years ago. I had it in the back of my head while I was working on my first book and other things, and then as soon as I could, as the 150th anniversaries came around, I turned to it and joined the reenactors.
Now, I wonder, you just alluded to it briefly here, but if you could give us a little bit more of a backstory about the 14th Brooklyn. I'm sure some people will recognize that regiment if you're a true diehard Civil War buff. But I wonder if you could give us just a little bit of background on that, and perhaps as well just a little bit of the identity of the soldier that you personally assumed once
Sure.
you became a reenactor.
Well, the 14th is unique in a lot of ways. The most visually apparent is the uniform, which is red pants in the chasseur style, so more of a straight leg pants, not the balloony zouave type of uniform. It's a chasseur uniform, straight leg red pants with white gaiters, a blue and red tunic that has 14 buttons on the false vest and on both sides of the blue. There's buttons on the cuffs and on the back that total 14, and there's 7 on each gaiter, so that's a total of 14. It's a really, it's unique, and it really kind of, you see it from a mile away when all of the reenactors are in Gettysburg or something. People, hey, Brooklyn, it's a distinctive uniform. They were also distinctive in that they were known throughout the war as the Brooklyn 14th. There were many regiments that were from a certain city, a certain town, even a certain profession within a certain town, as you know, and they were all kind of the New York, whatever, and in fact they have a designation, the New York 84th, but they were known as the Brooklyn 14th when they went into battle at Bull Run, and they were allowed to kind of keep that name, the Brooklyn 14th. They were the only city named regiment, and just they were from Brooklyn. This is what I love about them, is that in the winter quarters after Gettysburg, they took over an abandoned warehouse and put on a minstrel show and sold tickets to all the other soldiers. Walt Whitman went to the show and wrote about going there and seeing it. They were evidently very good at baseball and, played a lot of baseball. Some of the best national baseball teams in the country at that time were in Brooklyn. And they happened to be very good soldiers and distinguished themselves at Bull Run. They got nicknamed the Red-Legged Devils for their tenacity. And I think they might have been the only regiment. They fought all 3 days at Gettysburg, at the railroad cut, and then 2 days on Culp's Hill. So, it's to me what appeals about this is not just, they're distinctive in kind of every way, but also they're very much of Brooklyn. They had parishioners who were from Plymouth Church, which was sort of the hotbed of the abolition movement. Walt Whitman's there, seeing these guys in the hospital. It's an interesting moment for Brooklyn, and these guys have kind of lived through it all. I picked a guy. I'm coming late to the reenactor group. A lot of these guys have been doing this for 15 years or longer, and so a lot of the good people were taken. And when I say good people, I mean people who were kind of started in 1861, and they fought in every battle, and they mustered out in 1864 after the 3-year engagement. So by the time I got there, within Company E, I was kind of looking at either people who were shot and killed, or wounded and left, or people who had joined late. And I was intrigued by this latter category, especially because I thought, I'd like to pick someone who came home after the war and might have lived a long time. And this guy, John Boyce, fit that bill. He joined when he was 18 or 19. He had 2 brothers in the regiment. One was a soldier, one was a musician. And the family had come from England, and they worked in the Brooklyn Navy Yards, I believe, or they might have been glassmakers. I'm actually unclear on this, what he was before or what he was after the war, but pipe fitter, glassmaker kind of work. And so he joins young just before Antietam, and that group of 62 recruits, that was their initiation. They came into the regiment and at Antietam and kind of watched that. Many of them picked up arms, even though they were not fully trained. And John Boyce, I found his name in a mention. He was one of the last 14 members of the Brooklyn 14th to survive. And in 1923, he went to this ceremony. I guess there was an annual ceremony in Fort Greene Park right up here in Brooklyn around the statue of Colonel Fowler. And they would kind of honor the Brooklyn 14th, those who had died, and those who were still around. And so the newspaper article names him as one of the last remaining members of this, historic, esteemed regiment. And I love that idea, and I'm eager to find out more about him even after he came home from the war. He was wounded and taken prisoner at Spotsylvania, and he was a prisoner in Andersonville for a year. And this wound, he had a large piece of wood go through his foot, and this plagued him his whole life, the illness he got in Andersonville. But, he lived a long time, and he lived here in Brooklyn his whole life.
And now you also mentioned over the course of the article that as you became involved with reenacting, you started to do some of your own family research. And learn about your family's Civil War legacy, and what you found was a bit surprising, I guess you could say, or not what you were expecting. And I wonder if you might want to talk about that a little bit.
Right. I mean, what I knew was, my father had said he thought we had relatives who were on both sides of the Civil War, or might have been on both sides of the Civil War. I didn't even know I think a lot of Americans don't, sort of basically beyond your grandparents, what went on, where were they? Until a couple years ago, for instance, I didn't realize that, 2 of my grandparents were first-generation American, and so I sort of thought we'd all arrived in the last 100 years or so. And come to find out that a branch of my family, the Dellingers, and the Younts is one of the families that married into the Dellingers years ago. My great-great-great-grandfather. They've been in North Carolina. They came before the Revolutionary War, so they've been around for a long time. And they were kind of family subsistence farmers, the Younts, and George Washington Yount, my great-great-great-grandfather, fought in the 38th North Carolina Infantry with his brother Miles. And, I'm describing this, being able to tell a story as a narrative. I can't even, there are not that many plot points that I know, but you kind of discover them out of order. Like the first thing I saw about George Washington Yount was like a paper saying he deserted. And of course, that's kind of a bummer to think that your ancestor turned tail and ran. But then as I learned more context, it's like, for farming families, it was not uncommon for the soldiers to leave during the summer. One of the brothers would help with the harvest and then come back. And he did come back. He left in June of 1863. He was away from the army for the Battle of Gettysburg, where his brother Miles died on McPherson's Ridge. And then he came back to the 38th North Carolina in September of that year. And was later taken prisoner in 1864 in Hanover Courthouse and spent the last year of the war in Point Lookout Prison, Maryland. But what's interesting, the very last thing, the most recent thing I found out about him was one record online has him getting married on July 5th of 1863. So he's home, deserted, he's maybe helping with the farm, whatever. His brother Miles dies on July 1st. I don't know how fast news travels. I don't know if he finds out Miles is dead and that makes him want to get married, or if going home to get married was the plan all along, and maybe he found out about Miles 2 days later. And there's just all of this intrigue. Each piece of information raises half a dozen more questions. So the research here can be very addictive.
I bet. Now, one of your reenacting, I guess you could say, engagements, this past summer, obviously the 150th of Gettysburg, and obviously that was on many people's minds. Certainly there was a lot of coverage in the news, print as well as digital forms, and I wonder what your experience was like, because within even your piece you mentioned how there are different reenacting schools of thought, I guess you could say, and that leads to kind of different reenactments that people participate in. So I wonder if you might be able to speak about that as well in conjunction with the 150th of Gettysburg.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's sort of a rift, might be a strong word, but there's a kind of two different philosophies within the reenactor community. I think there's a sort of mainstream group that is out there to have fun, and they're out there because they love history, and they're out there to put on these kind of mega public displays. If you go to one of these mainstream events, it's really geared towards the person coming to see. You have stadium-style seating. You have someone on a bullhorn or public address system kind of narrating the action, and the reenactors are. It's almost like a football game. You're in this rectangle of space, kind of maneuvering. While someone's rattling off what your different regiments are, and it's very much like a halftime show. And that's those events are widely attended. They get huge crowds. They are and a lot of participants. There's an emerging school though that prizes authenticity a little bit more. Progressive reenactors, they call themselves. And these people feel that it's more important for the reenactor to have an immersive experience than for the spectator to have a comfortable experience. So at these events, you might find, if you come as a spectator, that you have to park and hike, a quarter mile or something to a clearing and stand in a line of trees to watch the battle. And whereas, at the mainstream events, it's the reenactor who has to march through a parking lot past porta potties to get to the battlefield. So it's just a sort of different take on things. What it has led to is oftentimes there are two observances of a given anniversary. There were two Antietam's, there were, I think, two Shilohs, and there were two Gettysburgs 1 week apart. I went to the more progressive kind, the more immersive. My unit just happens to be more in that school. And I have to say it was a complete success in that regard. I mean, there were moments over the course of that weekend where, um, I remember actually late one night rolling over. We're sleeping on a gum blanket on the floor under a tent, or on the floor on the ground under a tent, and I rolled over and my iPhone was in my pocket, and I was like, what is that? I didn't know what it was, and I took it out, and I was so in the 1860s that seeing this device from the future was, I don't know. But you really do. Uh, People worry about the stitching of their jacket. They worry about, is the belt right? They worry about, is the buckle right? They worry about, is that the kind of scarf you might have had? And it can seem very fussy and very silly to some people, but the net effect that it creates this whole other parallel world that you can get lost in, and that's kind of the joy of it. And I've enjoyed those moments when I've slipped into that other realm.
And another one of those events for you very recently was the events surrounding Remembrance Day, just very, very recently. I wonder if you might speak a little bit about that.
So actually, Remembrance Day is the farthest from that a little bit, because Remembrance Day every year is it's November, it's cold. It's not marking a battle, but rather the Gettysburg Address, which the Union Army put on a parade through the town, and that's really what is recreated. So at Remembrance Day, we get together and we stay in hotels, and we were in civilian clothes much of the time, or some mix of civilian clothes and reenactor clothes, which you see a lot before and after events, but especially during Remembrance Day. So the feel of Remembrance Day generally every year is a sort of homecoming, just all the reenactors hanging out in Gettysburg as a kind of big reenactor family. And this year was a little bit sad for the 14th, a lot sad for the 14th. We actually lost one of our leaders. The unit has been kind of run by a father-son pair, Frank and Frankie Ruiz, and Frankie had died suddenly a few weeks ago at the age of 32, and we'd gone to his funeral a few days before Remembrance Day, and so Remembrance Day became this year kind of a celebration of him, a marking of his passing, and I would just share this as evidence of how the reenactor community is very family-like. His father, we talked about this over email as a group. Should we wear our uniforms to the funeral? And in the end, his father decided to wear his uniform to the funeral, and so we all wore our uniforms to the funeral and sort of served as an honor guard, a reenactor honor guard there. And it was incredibly moving, and sort of this is the world we knew him in. Even his father, this is what they did together. It was really touching. They're wonderful people, and during the Remembrance Day parade, there were people along the route and in the parade, in front of and behind us who had known Frankie. He was kind of a giant in the reenactor world, and they would stop us to pay their respects. You couldn't really walk 10 feet in Gettysburg that weekend without someone seeing your red pants and saying, sorry about Frankie. So it was a sad time, but as I say, the silver lining, if you can call it that, would be it really, in the end, proved to me just how this reenactor world is a family, and our regiment is a very tight knit group. We're not. The history brings us together, and this hobby is just as much a real pursuit, a real life thing for us as anything else.
It's really a powerful story, Matt. Last thing I want to send you off on this note is I was wondering if you could just share with us a little bit about your current book project, which deals with the 14th Brooklyn.
Well, the book project is one of those that has been, you know, in the back of my head for quite a long time, and me being a reenactor is part of me becoming a lot more serious about it. But I'm working on a book about the Brooklyn 14th, and it's both the men in the Brooklyn 14th, the regiment, but also the home front of Brooklyn at that time. It's fairly ambitious what I want to do, but essentially, I think there's an amazing story here, not just on the battlefront, but also everything that was going on at the time. Walt Whitman's Brooklyn and Henry Ward Beecher's Brooklyn. The Monitor, the ironclad was built here in Brooklyn. The pharmaceutical industry, Pfizer, got up and running, sending drugs into the home front, and it's a big American moment and a place in time, Brooklyn during the Civil War, and these are the guys who really saw it, and they really saw the change that happened in the 30 years after the Civil War. The Brooklyn Bridge is built, Brooklyn becomes part of New York City, Prospect Park is laid out, and they were part of it. They lived this wartime Brooklyn and post-war Brooklyn. So I don't know how long it will take me to write this book, especially given that I don't yet have a publisher and I do have a full-time job. So those are challenges, but I'm going to write this book. It fascinates me every day. The more I talk about it, the more I want to talk about it more and learn about it more.
Sounds like a fascinating topic. Certainly, I think something that a lot of our viewers, a lot of our readers would be interested in. So thanks so much for taking a little bit of time out of your day to speak with us. Appreciate it. Just as a reminder to everybody, if you haven't had a chance to pick up this issue of the Monitor, the phone number below is the number that you can use to call for back issues of the magazine, and you can pick up the issue, the fall 2013 issue that includes Matt's wonderful piece. So Matt, again, thanks so much for coming on with us, and hope that we can have you on again in the future, perhaps talk about the Brooklyn 14th.
My pleasure. You got it.